The VA is potentially on the verge of getting a new type of antidepressant, but is that actually a good thing? Let's jump into it. Back in March, the FDA approved the esketamine nasal spray Spravato for treating severely depressed patients who don't respond to other drugs. It represented the first truly new kind of depression drug since Prozac arrived way back in 1988. This is of course significant because suicides claimed more than 47,000 lives in the US back in 2017 alone. And for severely depressed patients, there is an increased risk of suicide. Now, there is a rush to get this ready because the VA was advised by President Trump to buy the Johnson & Johnson drug and ASAP. And so there's been sort of a time crunch there. But psychiatrists and medical researchers, including some of the VA, have raised questions about the drug's effectiveness and safety. During their trials, 3 people who had taken it committed suicide and 3 others died, as opposed to none on placebos, though the FDA said there was no evidence the drug and the deaths were linked. Still seems sort of significant, and thankfully we're now joined by the reporter who did that reporting. This is Peter Carey, business reporter for the Center for Public Integrity. Peter, welcome to the show.
Hi, John. Thanks for having me on.
Very glad to have you here. This is an interesting situation going on right now. The deaths that happened on this drug, how seriously should we take that? The FDA says it's not connected, but should we be worried?
I think common sense tells you that they ought to be looked at closely or more closely. I mean, really, 6 people died during the trials on this drug while no one died on the placebo. There were about an equal number of patients on this drug versus the placebo takers. This is supposed to be an antidepressant and, quote, anti-suicide drug, and yet 3 of the people who'd taken this drug during the trials died from suicide. Mm-hmm. One of them, one person died 26 hours after taking the drug in a motorcycle accident, one 3 days after taking the drug by his own hand, and 2 others died a couple of weeks after taking the drug also.
That is devastating. And so we've got those deaths. What do we know about other side effects? Are they significant?
The other side effects are significant. There's an out-of-body sort of experience, hallucinogenic effects, high blood pressure, and even some see additional or new onsets of depression. So all of those things are very worrisome. For that reason, the FDA, I would say the wise heads at the FDA, the careful people at the FDA, the pharmacologists and psychiatrists are trying to go very slowly with this drug and treat, when patients are treated with it, to try to treat them with great caution. For instance, if they take the drug, they need to stay in the doctor's office 2 full more hours just to make sure that they don't have some sort of immediate reaction. And they can't drive an automobile for 24 hours after taking the drug. But unfortunately, I think our president just rushed the VA, tried to rush them, and to some degree had some success, rushed them into trying to get this drug out to patients. All of which was done, I think, incautiously, and had the cooler heads at the FDA prevailed, this drug would have been rolled out in a much more careful and judicious and efficacious manner.
So based on your research, I'm curious, he gave this directive, you got to get this thing ready for patients now, go, go, go. I'm curious, is there any reason to believe that, considering all of the other corruption stories in the news, that there's some sort of business connection there, that Donald Trump or anyone in the administration could be making money off of Johnson & Johnson having these new contracts? Or is it just a regular lack of caution, that it seems like a good thing and so he wants to rush it out?
Well, the latter, the one you just mentioned, is certainly a possibility. I don't think we've seen any signs of some sort of nefarious business connection, but personal connections seem to me to be quite, if not likely, at least suspicious. Trump is very good friends with Woody Johnson, who's the heir to the Johnson & Johnson fortune. He lives at the Trump International Hotel. He's given Trump millions of dollars for his campaign, and he's now the ambassador to the UK. At the same time, Trump has been taking advice from an interesting trio of people who he connected with down at Mar-a-Lago, who've sort of been helping him shape his VA policies. And those people have been working with Johnson & Johnson through the last couple of years in sort of working with Johnson & Johnson and the VA toward suicide prevention. So you could see at least those two, maybe any other likely channels through which the president would have learned of this drug and then thought, wow, I want to go down as being the president who really helped the vets. So here's something I'm going to do for the vets that's great. I'm going to demand that the VA buy, quote, truckloads of this drug. Well, the whole thing is crazy. I mean, the VA doesn't buy truckloads of anything. They just wait until doctors, prescribe the drugs, and then the doctors either go to the pharmacy or they order the drugs from the manufacturers. But they don't come in the truckloads. They come in one at a time, to treat the patients who need them.
Yeah, and so the whole getting truckloads of it is a concern, both because they don't do that, but also because there would be a great cost associated with that. Can you tell us a little bit about the comparison of Spravato's cost in comparison to other antidepressant drugs?
I can't do that for you. I can tell you that Spravato is considered to be a high-cost drug, and a couple of sort of nonprofit agencies have looked at its costs. It's at least $300 for one dose from that inhaler you're showing on your screen. And originally it was estimated actually to cost double that, and there's no telling how many doses people will need. The other issue, of course, is as to how much of the Spravato doses will be covered by insurance, and I think that's still an open question. Partly because the cooler heads at the VA decided not to put this drug on their formulary. Their formulary is sort of the list of specified drugs and approved drugs that would be readily available to doctors if needed. This drug was put not on the formulary or taken off the formulary because the people on the formulary committee were concerned about its efficacy and its dangers. So the only way patients can even get the drug is that if a doctor decides that this is the only appropriate medicine left for them to take for their depression, and the doctor has to fill out all sorts of forms and paperwork and that sort of thing and submit it up through the VA channels so that the patients can finally take a chance with this drug.
I'm glad that you mentioned efficacy there, because there's one more point I want to touch on. And in your reporting, you talk about there's not only the side effects and the deaths, but there's also apparently significant concerns about whether, for fairly large sort of groups of patients, whether it has any effect at all. Could you talk about that?
Well, yes. I mean, that's a really interesting question. The whole FDA approval process for this was skimpy, shall we say? It sort of had signs of being hurried, and it violated the norms of the previous sort of trials that had been used for other similar drugs. In this case, I guess to put it in most simple terms, this drug scored in the best trials, in the one or two trials that were seen to be efficacious. This drug scored about 4 points higher than the placebo on a scale of 60 points. So you can see that even in the best of cases, it didn't seem to be that much more effective. Second, there were no trials that showed this drug to work for people over the age of 65, and there were some serious questions among researchers who looked at the data as to whether this drug even was effective for men. The VA patient population, as you might guess, is about 90% men and over 50% people over 65.
Yeah. So those are, I think, to put it mildly, some significant concerns about the use of the drug. Peter Carey, business reporter for the Center for Public Integrity, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you very much.
For more political news breakdowns, interviews, stories of activism, and me trying my hardest to care about the occasional big celebrity news story, subscribe to our YouTube channel at youtube.com/The Damage Report. And you can ring the bell wherever it is so you don't miss anything.